still pursued an ancient way of life and freedom in the Kalahari. University, the oldest in America, has become a symbol of man's search to understand the world and himself. A few short blocks from Harvard, in an antiquated factory building, is another institution, unpretentious and unconventional, but also dedicated to understanding man. The Center for Documentary Educational Resources. Founded by John Marshall, a filmmaker anthropologist, and his associates, the center produces in-depth studies of different cultures and ways of life. Through these films, anthropologists and students are able to compare other cultures with our own.
How many different languages are there?
Oh, no one knows. There are 6, 7, I don't know.
His most important study is of the Kalahari Bushmen, 500,000 feet of film, dating back more than 20 years.
The people I lived with in the western Kalahari called themselves Krog, the name of the thick language they spoke. They lived in a place called Wankai, in small bands of related families, perhaps 15 to 40 men, women, and children. They were gatherers. Women gathered more than 100 different kinds of wild roots, nuts, and berries, providing for their families. Women sustained their families. Men hunted for the whole band. The best hunter I ever knew was Tuma, the leader of his people. One thing about the Queen people is that they're probably one of the last hunting-gathering peoples that have maintained their independence. When I was 17, Tuma taught me what hunting meant. When we saw giraffes one winter morning, Tuma knew how ambitious it was to hunt them. His kinsman, Kao, was non-committal, but the younger men were eager. So Tuma sent Crooked 3 down on an angle to intercept the giraffes. Struck the last giraffe, a female, in the thigh. The older men knew they would be tracking such a strong creature for days, but 3 raced vainly after the giraffe. Far out in the plain, we found the shaft of his arrow. The points, coated with poison, are detachable. Blunt near the tip meant the point was deep in the giraffe. All afternoon, the hunters trailed the herd, learning the tracks of the wounded giraffe until they could recognize them at a glance. The hunters sat near their fires, ready for the night. They did not mention the giraffe, for to speak of her would give her strength. They waited and let their poison work. In the morning, the men found where the giraffes had rested during the night. Carl wondered if the wounded giraffe had already left the herd. At our feet, a beetle rolled a ball of dung across the trampled ground. All examined the dung and detected signs of poison. As the winter sun rose, the men could discover no pattern of movement among the giraffes. Their tracks were mingled and confused. 3 had left the herd. Toma thought the wounded one was with them. And he was right. The wounded giraffe left her companions and ran alone, bunched with pain. The hunters knew the poison was in her brain, the infection mortal. The next day, we used ostrich eggs to drink at Gaucho, one of the few permanent water holes in the western Kalahari. We drank deeply, because to the west there was no water. The young men expected to find the giraffe lying dead in the morning, but Puma knew her strength, and by now he knew her mind. She had been circling, and Puma guessed we could intercept her. We found her in the early afternoon. She could or would go no further. Their first attempt failed. They spent their spears and energies on her, and still she stood. Now, if the hunters were tired, it made no difference. She was already dead. Toma made the first division of the meat. Each hunter received his share, and his wife's family's share. And while we shared the liver, the hunter's portion, I realized that beyond satisfying hunger, hunting confirmed kinship ties. The kill was distributed among all the people, drawing them together. Those who came to carry the meat home each received a share for their families. Kin gave to kin until everyone living together, some 30 people, were cooking and eating the giraffe. Puma told the story of the hunt, further binding the people together in common experience. It has been 15 years since John Marshall has seen the people whose way of life he shared, and Toma, who gave him his Bushman name. He too is Toma. Now for the National Geographic Society, he will return to the Kalahari. John Marshall returns again to the Kalahari. With him is Ladino, a Bantu interpreter and close friend. 2 support vehicles carry food, fuel, and water as the tiny caravan heads into the African wasteland of some 600,000 square miles.
Southwest Africa is a 10-foot high fence put up by the Southwest African Administration. Just over the fence is a government reservation set aside for Kung people. Here, John Marshall cannot enter.
Near the border, we had picked up two acquaintances, Kung bushmen I had known in 1957. They would carry a message some 30 miles into the region called Montgomery. I said, talk to no one until you see Tuma and tell him I'm here. He'd know if the government would really let people come. Only the Kung are free to cross the border between Botswana and the reservation where they are restricted in Southwest Africa. For 15 years, I had been denied permission to return to Montgomery.
It was 1951 when he first came to Nainai at the age of 17 with his family. The Marshalls would be recognized among anthropologists for their work in recording the vanishing Bushman culture. John for his films, his sister Elizabeth for a best-selling book, The Harmless People. 7 expeditions were organized by his father, Lawrence. Most respected for scientific work would be Lorna Marshall, John's mother. John Marshall and his party make camp a quarter of a mile from the fence.
Is he living?
Yes, this city is alive. He's still living. The city is at Chumpu.
For 3 days they wait for the people of Nainai. John Marshall had hoped that perhaps a few would make the long trek. Instead, there are nearly 50 men, women, and children. There are those who knew the Marshalls, and those too young to remember, but who have heard the story. They have come 30 miles through the Kalahari to see a friend. Leading the people as he has for nearly 2 decades, as he once led the hunters, is a man named Tuma. Except for the children, I knew them all. Tuma, who had given me his name. Gal, the musician. People who had grown so. I wanted to show people some of the movies I had made. We remembered the happy times, the good rains that fell my last year in Montgomery. To people who live on wild foods, the rainy season, from October to early March, is the time when life starts again. It's the happiest time of all. Toma remembered how even after the rains were over, there were clear, shallow ponds in the desert where he bathed.
Somehow, the Kong always see humor in life, like the day the women and children went berry picking and stirred up a nest of hornets. I especially wanted to see Mai. I had begun a film study of her when she was 6, and filmed her last at 13. I remembered a mischievous and vital child, and found a beautiful, mature young woman. People could stay only 4 days. We discussed not the past, but the new problems of life on the reservation. Carl said Puma had received 1 cow from the government, but not the bull. He concluded progress would be slow. Their concern was with the future. I wondered how long their past would remain in living memory. Before he returned to the reservation at Montley, Puma and I visited the small, strange hills of Tsodillo, which Puma had never seen. There, in painting, are images reaching back through centuries. The hands of the people. And again. Here he says such handprints are signatures or magic signs. Puma said the hands and creature were one painting, the story of a hunt. The hunter saw an eland, and his hands showed how he crept close. Try the giraffe, Puma said. Puma told me that they painted the giraffe, showing how to stalk it, just like we did in Montley when I was a boy. And he said they were Jussi, the people, and they lived out there long, long ago. There were so many Bushman peoples once, living throughout all of southern Africa. 18 years ago, I lived with one small band who spoke a different language than Puma's people. They had so little, except great knowledge of their environment. A melon became its own bowl. A digging stick became a pestle, and then a spoon. The oldest member of the band was a composer named Buhone. His songs celebrated day-to-day events in the gathering hunting life. Buhone's culture was intangible. Knowledge, traditions, values. His compositions were its living record, easily swept away.
Searching for a trace of Buhone's people, John Marshall moved along the desert's edge, from one marginal ranch to the next. On farms surrounding waterholes that once were theirs, more than 70% of the Bushmen have sought work, most eking out a tenuous existence.
Last whenever you come to the farms, I don't know if he doesn't get any work.
Marshall has found Guyana-Clay, the son of old Buhone, the musician.
He told me, I left the desert long ago because of thirst. My father is dead. My people scattered. I am here because there is nowhere else to go. I don't remember my father's music. Why should I?
Marshall has learned that other Bushmen are still living in the very heart of the Kalahari. After 120 miles, he reaches the place called Khade, where the Botswana government has sunk a well, and where he has heard that people he once knew are raising livestock. Expectation turns to disappointment. The village is deserted.
It's dead? Well, it is broken. That's why they left. That's for sure.
The pump has been broken for a long time, many months. With new parts, it can be fixed. But what has become of the people and their animals?
There's no water.
Dry season, flames sweeping across the Kalahari may be a sign of life. The tinder dry brush is often ignited by the fires of villagers. For days, Marshall and his party have searched the desert for the people and animals who abandoned the village of Khade because of a broken pump. For Marshall, there is the chance that the nearby tribesmen who started the fires have some knowledge of the Khade people.
This place is
We found a tiny Bantu village which was called Luichwaha, which means one elephant. Ask him if he knows of any people that live further out into this. One man had heard of a group of people far out in the desert who were moving north.
Beyond the last settlement, they follow ancient game trails, hoping to find a trace of the Khade people. Late on a September afternoon, they find the people they have searched for, the people of Khade.
They told us that 4 months ago they had left Khade, moving north in the increasing heat of the dry season to this place where they had relatives. Since they had left home, they had had no water, except for what they could get from roots and melons. I'd seen thirst before, but not like this. They distributed what water we could give them with manners and patience. There were 42 people, and I began to wonder how they really had survived. Their problem was complicated, for they wanted their animals to live also. How could anything have survived here so long without drinking? To find out how they had stayed alive, I had to learn everyone's name and how how they were related. Kinship has always been the key to Bushman survival. After learning people's names, you learn how households are related through marriage.
It's pure
The Hardy people were related through marriage to people living nearby, relatives bound by kinship to help them. These houses have been made because the rains may be coming. The rains were late. People said they might not come at all, and they told me that all the melons had been picked. Did the people have melons stored at that village? Without melons of their own, they depended on their relatives, who had few to give. There were barely enough melons for the people. There had never been any for the goats, who had lived for 4 months on what moisture they could get from the dried up leaves and twigs. There were melons for one animal, a horse named Vadia. Although she was owned by one man, Maipiro, everyone watered her. On his horse, Maipiro hunted for all the people. It had been a long time since they had eaten big game, because thirst had worn down the horse. The melons could only keep her alive. Gifts of melons could never have kept the people alive. Their lives depended, as they always had, on what women could gather, on their knowledge of many plants, on their eyes keen enough to see tiny vines, and on their thin, strong arms. For 99% of human history, all people were gatherers and hunters, living in small, flexible bands, depending on a vast and intimate knowledge of their environment. The roots the women tugged at deep in the sand had stored up water through the long, dry season. Barely enough water for the people, none for their animals. In the heat of midday, animals and people clung to the fragile shade of the tree branches. What seemed like the peace of the animals was really the peace of thirst. Thirst never lets you go. The only way to deal with it is to do as little as possible. Even the children had learned to accept the idea of death, for it is never far away. You see,
are dying, and their donkeys will die. And if they stay here, their children will also die, and the old people will die of thirst. Because they stayed here for about 3 months without water since they left the Kadi.
They could go no farther. Nowhere would their animals be allowed to drink. Where do you want to go now?
Back to Kadi. They say they want to go to our forefathers' places where their fathers died and were buried. Then they want to live in that places. It's their own places. Kadi.
They had neither the money nor resources to fix the broken pump at the village of Khadi. We said we'd try to get the parts and fix it. They accepted our promise without revealing emotion. Self-control is critical in an intimate society where everyone is equal. So is participation in the expressive and spiritual life of the community. In a dance, participation becomes collective art. My sister Elizabeth, in her book, described the dance as an infinitely complicated pattern of voices and rhythm, an orchestra of bodies. Even their god and the spirits of the dead are attracted to good music, listening from the darkness beyond the fire. Underlying the gaiety, there is deep magic. For the dance is the way the people protect themselves from the dark forces within themselves and their land, from the evil of dissension, from thirst and starvation, from disease and death. The people of Khadi dance the rain rhythm, the most ancient as it is the most important, for the scarcity of water is the ever-present theme which dominates their lives. It was the lack of water which drove them from their home, and it was the promise of water once again which gave them the hope of returning. On a September morning, the children feel a thrill of anticipation in the camp. After 2 weeks, Marshall and Ladimo have returned from Khadi. The pump has been fixed. And we have to have enough water for our truck and ourselves. So we're going to try to give two of these. If they stay waiting for the doubtful rains, donkeys and goats will continue to die, and people will be in danger. They will take their losses on the trek. They have decided to go home. The few who owned donkeys rode, but most had to walk 120 The death of their goats would mean the end of their new way of life, for goats enabled them to buy things they couldn't make themselves. They had become dependent on an outside world which had always rejected them. Bushmen had been despised, slaughtered like animals, their lands and waters taken over by Bantu and white alike. But if these people could reach Khadi and hold it, there would be a chance they could continue to exist as a people. As they moved ahead, everyone gathered roots along the way. And as the days passed and they got closer to home, they moved through country where the wild foods had not been gathered and where the game was plentiful. Now, for the first time in weeks, there was the hope of meat. For me, my Pyrenees horse symbolized the great contrast between an existence they had always known and an emerging way of life. Now with horse and dogs, the time and labor of the hunt is cut by days. The dogs had laid the kudu within 20 minutes. But I remembered with what skill and patience we used to track the game. Killing so efficiently seemed to rob hunting of its symbolic quality, making it a simple act of subsistence, instead of a larger act of kinship, binding the people together. Stretching across the horizon. The day dawned chill and misty. The people felt confident. They knew that up ahead, rain had fallen. The long, brutal dry spell was broken. They would be able to travel faster and farther in the cool weather, strengthened by the fresh meat of the kudu. Instead of the 6 miles a day they had averaged in the beginning, they could travel perhaps 15. They were almost home. No longer must the goats be driven forward. They sensed that during the night, rain had fallen somewhere to the south. finally found, near the place where they began, came too late for many of their animals. More than a fourth of their goats had died. In the final days of their journey, they wondered if they would ever again be forced to leave Hadi and set out into the desert. Later, there would be time to go to their huts, to unpack and rest. Their first concern lay a few hundred yards beyond the village. Nowhere left for themselves and their flocks but the central Kalahari, where the water is deep beneath the sand. The Hadi people were dependent for their future on an ancient engine and a 4-inch pipe. It seemed to me that now their real struggle was beginning. To hold their land, to keep the pump, to take their place in the larger economy of their country. They could give up and be scattered like so many before them. Or they could be together as a people and keep the values that had always sustained them. The children of Hadi still played the games their ancestors had for hundreds of generations, acquiring the essential values of participation basic to the life of their small society. Now the children of Hadi faced a different future. In 15 years, so much had changed. The future of many of the peoples I had known was no longer in their own hands. Others were scattered, losing the knowledge of the desert they needed to lead independent lives. And the Kalahari, too, was changing.